You gave the best years of your strength to people who never once measured what it cost you. The late nights, the money you didn't have but gave anyway, the arguments you stayed silent through because keeping the peace mattered more than being right, the version of yourself you buried so the family could stay comfortable. Nobody clapped for that, nobody even noticed it, and that is exactly how some people prefer it. Because loyalty that goes unnoticed is loyalty that never has to be repaid. Here is the part that breaks something in a person. You start to realize that loyalty was never about you. It was about what you provided, your presence, your patience, your money, your silence, your willingness to carry weight nobody else wanted to touch. You were not a person to them, you were a function. And functions get used until they are no longer needed. People love to say family is forever, family is everything. But watch closely, and you will see who actually shows up when there is nothing left to gain from you. Watch who calls when you have something. Watch who disappears when you don't. That silence tells you everything words never will. The cost of loyalty is rarely paid in money. It is paid in years, in the version of yourself that stayed quiet so others could be loud. In the dreams you postponed, because somebody always needed you more than you needed yourself. In the nights you sat alone, exhausted, while the people you carried slept peacefully, never once wondering what staying loyal had taken from you. And the cruelest part, when you finally grow tired, when you finally stop giving everything without limit, they don't ask what happened to you. They ask what happened to your loyalty. As if loyalty is supposed to survive being taken advantage of forever. As if a person is required to keep bleeding quietly just to prove they still love. But listen carefully. Loyalty was never meant to be one direction only. Real loyalty protects both people. It does not drain one person to comfort another. The moment loyalty only flows one way, it stops being loyalty. It becomes labor. Unpaid, unnoticed, expected labor. And many people spend entire decades performing that labor while calling it love. You start noticing the pattern slowly. Not all at once. It arrives in small moments. The time you were sick and nobody asked twice. The time you needed help and silence answered instead. The time your effort was simply expected, never appreciated. Small moments. But small moments add up into a quiet, heavy truth. You were carrying people who would never carry you back. And the mind starts asking dangerous questions late at night. Did they ever actually value me? Or just what I gave them? Was 30 years of loyalty ever seen or only used? Sometimes the answer is worse than the question. Because some people never loved your heart. They loved your usefulness. They loved that you never said no. They loved that you absorbed the cost so they never had to. The sacrifices you made quietly, the ones nobody thanked you for, do not become worthless just because nobody else witnessed them. Every time you chose them over yourself and called it duty, that choice still shaped who you became. What it took to keep showing up for people who only showed up for you when it was convenient was not carried for nothing, even if no one else ever acknowledges what it cost. So do not let their blindness convince you that your sacrifice meant nothing. It meant everything to you. It cost you sleep, peace, years, pieces of yourself you will never fully get back. That cost is real, even if the people who caused it never acknowledge it, especially because they never will. Here is something age teaches a person, slowly and without mercy. Loyalty given to people who never reciprocate it does not make you weak. It makes you generous in a world that rarely deserves generosity. But generosity without boundaries becomes self-destruction, and many loyal people only learn that lesson after decades of giving themselves away. You begin to understand something uncomfortable. Some people are not capable of loyalty the way you practice it. They take naturally, the way breathing is natural, not because they are evil, because nobody ever required anything different from them. You taught them, without meaning to, that your loyalty came with no price, so they never paid one. And maybe that is the heaviest truth in all of this. You were not betrayed by cruelty, you were betrayed by comfort. Their comfort, built on your exhaustion. Their ease, paid for by your sleepless nights. Their stability, financed quietly by years you can never get back. That is a different kind of wound. Quieter, slower, but just as real. Still, do not let this make you bitter toward every relationship you have left. Not everyone takes without giving. Not everyone mistakes your patience for permission. But you must learn, finally, after everything, who actually deserves the deepest parts of your loyalty, and who simply learn to expect it for free. Some people will only respect your boundaries once you finally set one. They will be shocked. They will say you changed. No, you did not change. You simply stopped paying a debt that was never yours to carry alone in the first place. And watching their reaction to your first boundary will tell you exactly how much they valued you versus how much they valued your compliance. That moment is hard. Setting the boundary after 30 years of having none feels like betrayal, even though it is the opposite. It feels selfish, even though it is survival. The guilt arrives before the relief does. Because you were trained, slowly, year after year, to believe that loyalty only counts if it costs you everything and asks for nothing in return. But loyalty was never meant to require your destruction. Nothing true ever asked you to disappear so others could be comfortable. Somewhere along the way, certain people convinced you that love meant erasing yourself for their benefit. That was never love. That was convenience wearing love's clothing. And here is something worth sitting with, whether the people who used your loyalty ever realize it or not. People who take without giving back rarely escape the pattern cleanly. It tends to repeat in their other relationships, in their own children who learn the same habits and one day take from them the way they once took from you. In a kind of loneliness that quietly finds people who spent their lives consuming loyalty instead of building it. You do not need to chase that outcome, or wait for it, or hope for it out loud. Whether it comes or not is not yours to control, and tying your peace to it only keeps you bound to them longer. Your only responsibility now is protecting what remains of your own peace. Time does not move at the same pace as human patience, and that difference matters more than people realize when they are still inside the waiting. You want the people who took your loyalty for decades to understand it now, immediately, completely. But understanding rarely arrives on demand. Sometimes a person has to lose access to something for years before they recognize what it actually was. Sometimes the lesson only lands once the comfort is gone. That is not cruelty. That is simply how stubborn hearts learn anything at all. And some people never learn it. That is the part that is hardest to accept. Some people take loyalty their entire lives and never once turn around to examine what it cost the person giving it. They grow old still believing they were simply loved, never once wondering if they were only convenient to be around. That is its own quiet punishment, even if it never looks like one from the outside. A person who never learns gratitude spends their whole life surrounded by people, yet strangely, mysteriously alone inside every relationship they have. You, on the other hand, do not need them to learn anything in order to heal. That distinction matters. For years you may have believed your peace depended on their understanding, on their apology, on their finally seeing what 30 years of loyalty actually demanded from you. But peace that depends on someone else's recognition is not peace at all. It is a hostage situation dressed up as patience. So release the requirement that they understand. Release the need for them to apologize correctly, fully, in the exact words you have rehearsed in your head during sleepless nights. Some debts are simply never repaid in this life. That is not fair. Nobody said it would be, but your healing cannot wait behind a door that may never open from their side. Ha! Funny how the people who took the most loyalty are usually the first to call you selfish the moment you finally keep something for yourself. That reaction is not proof that you did something wrong. It is proof of how much they had grown used to taking. The discomfort they feel is the discomfort of losing access, not the discomfort of losing you. So let them be uncomfortable. Discomfort is not cruelty. It is simply what happens when somebody who took for 30 years finally meets a limit. You are not required to manage their disappointment in your boundaries. You were never required to make your own exhaustion easy for them to ignore. There is a quieter pain underneath all of this, one that rarely gets spoken aloud. It is the grief of realizing how much of your life was spent earning love that was never actually conditional in their eyes. They were never going to leave you for having needs. They simply never expected you to have any. And discovering that after decades can feel like mourning a version of the relationship that never truly existed. But that grief, as heavy as it is, carries something important inside it. Clarity. You finally see the relationship as it was, not as you hoped it would become if you just gave a little more, stayed a little longer, sacrificed a little deeper. That clarity is uncomfortable. It is also freedom, arriving later than you wanted, but arriving nonetheless. Healing from this does not look like cutting everyone off forever. For most people, it looks much quieter than that. It looks like giving loyalty in proportion now, instead of without limit. It looks like noticing who shows up consistently, not only when there is something to gain. It looks like allowing relationships to prove themselves slowly again, instead of assuming loyalty must be infinite simply because blood or decades connect you. And it looks like forgiving yourself, finally, for not knowing sooner. You were not foolish for trusting people who shared your blood or your history. You were human. You believed loyalty would be met with loyalty, because that is what a good heart assumes until experience teaches it otherwise. That is not a flaw. That is decency given to people who did not deserve the weight of it. Some nights, the old questions still return. Did they ever truly value me? Was I only useful? You may never get a clean answer from them directly. Some people are simply incapable of admitting what they took, even to themselves. But you do not need their confession to move forward. You only need your own clarity. And clarity, once it arrives fully, does not require anyone else's permission to be true. There is also a strange kind of mourning that happens during this stage, one that does not look like grief from the outside, because nobody died and nothing dramatic occurred. You simply stop expecting certain people to change. And that quiet acceptance, as calm as it looks, carries real sorrow inside it. You are not mourning them. You are mourning the decades you spent, hoping they would eventually notice. That hope took up space in you for a long time. Letting it go leaves a strange emptiness at first, before it leaves room for something steadier. And slowly that steadier thing arrives. Not happiness exactly, something quieter than happiness. The ability to sit with people now and simply observe, without the old anxious need to prove your worth through endless giving. You watch who reciprocates and who simply receives. You notice it calmly now, almost like data, instead of feeling it like a wound every single time. That shift from wound to observation is one of the clearest signs that healing is actually happening underneath the surface. Abinge gives you one advantage younger people rarely have yet. Pattern recognition built from decades, not theories. You have lived long enough to watch the same kind of taking repeat itself across different people, different decades, sometimes different generations of the same family. You no longer need to guess who values you. Watching someone closely over enough time, sooner or later, tells you what words alone never could. What you are building now, slowly, is something different from what you spent decades practicing. Not loyalty without limits. Loyalty with discernment. Loyalty that protects you as much as it protects the people you choose to give it to. That is not coldness. That is wisdom paid for in the most expensive currency there is. Years. Energy. Pieces of a softer version of yourself that the world was never gentle enough to deserve completely. And maybe, after everything, that is the real cost of loyalty nobody tells you about beforehand. Not what you gave to people who took without thinking twice, but what it finally takes to learn, after all those years, that your loyalty was always valuable enough to be earned, not simply assumed. That truth arrives late for many people. But late is still better than never, and once it arrives, fully, quietly, without anyone's applause, you finally start giving the rest of your life only to people who understand exactly what they are receiving when you choose to stay loyal to them.